this sector just lends itself for marketing slogans and swag, really. My name's Eric Wessoff. I'm the founder of Canary Media. We're a nonprofit media organization that covers the energy transition, and we have about a 20-year legacy in reporting on this stuff. I'll talk for a couple of seconds, and then I'll turn it over to our smart panel. I want to put this in a little bit of context. I've been covering this stuff for renewable energy for 15 years. Andrew has been in this business for a little more than that. And this place has sort of the vibe of solar power, SPI 2008, maybe, something like that. Just when the venture capitalists started sniffing around solar and creating 150 solar startups. And so I'm not going to say the best is yet to come. That's already been said. But this is the kind of energy that a nascent early industry has. But when we were at SPI 2008, geothermal in the United States was about 2-3 gigawatts, and solar was about 0 gigawatts. Today, solar in the United States has installed 150, roughly, order of magnitude correct, gigawatts, and geothermal is still at 2 gigawatts in the United States. So, tell me who you are, what your firm does, and why has that happened? What is broken with the geothermal industry?
Yeah, I mean, I assume we're going to spend a lot of the panel talking about the gap between the reality of today and 20 years ago, which has not changed much, and the road ahead. But I'm Andrew Beebe with Obvious Ventures. I lead all of our climate investing. We are a local firm here in San Francisco. For the last 10 years, we've been investing across planetary health, human health, and economic health. And I lead the planetary part of that. Interestingly, I was a solar entrepreneur, as Eric suggested, for a little over a decade before joining Obvious, and was part of the massive ramp up in the solar industry, a small part, but during that time we really transformed an industry from not much of anything commercially to a dominant part of the energy landscape globally. And I do think the same thing is likely or about to happen in the geothermal space, and I think probably we all represent different parts of that sort of the solves. The part that I'm most excited about, and the reason we invested in Zanskar, is that geothermal should be powering 25% of baseload in America, maybe at least, but one of the challenges is simply finding it. And the cost effectiveness of finding geothermal, supercritical geothermal resources underground, as probably most people in the room know, is just upside down. We are hitting like 1 out of 10 major wells that we drill, and we should be hitting 9 out of 10 major wells. And so I think that is a part that I've been really obsessed with and excited by, and I do think AI and what Zanskar is doing is one piece of that solution to find the resources, and I know there are a lot of other solutions as well.
Great. Sebastian, same thing. Tell us about your fund, about yourself, and your first take and impression on geothermal for the last 20 years.
Okay, lovely to be here, first of all, and I think the fact that we're sitting here and having a geothermal discussion itself is remarkable, and really thank you to the team here at Project Innerspace for making this happen. This is the type of movement that is needed to advance the cause. So I'm Sebastian, I'm co-founder of Extensive Capital. We are a venture capitalist firm, not too different from the gentleman next to me. So we invest broadly in industrial and energy transition. And of course, all of energy generation, transmission, storage, all these topics are in focus. And we definitely have a sort of a specialty niche for dispatchable baseload firm, whatever you want to call it, power assets. So I think that's the missing link. When I look at wind and solar, it is changing a little bit with batteries now becoming ever more competitive. But when I look at wind and solar, I would call them an energy addition. because I'm not shutting down an oil well because I'm building a solar panel. And what we really need is transition technologies. And that's where geothermal comes in, others too. But geothermal is definitely one, and very interesting one, and very democratic one. It's very evenly distributed at the end of the day across the world. Yes, there are challenges on how do we get to it, how we find efficiently, but all of these challenges, in my view, are engineering challenges. They're not scientific challenges like I would have in fusion, for example.
No, in fusion they keep telling me they're just engineering challenges.
Yeah, they like to say that, I know.
Sorry.
Not going to get into
Wrong
that now, but even that, but engineering challenges, even if we all have them, time and money will solve. And that's why I'm quite optimistic about geothermal.
All right. Torsten, you're in a unique spot. Your fund is devoted and dedicated to geothermal.
That's right.
You are both immersed and overexposed to geothermal. Tell me about that decision. Who your LPs are? Who are the folks whose money you're investing? And yeah,
Absolutely.
Maybe we're
Overexposed.
just the underexposed.
You're underexposed.
He's correctly.
And we're overexposed. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Oh, it's absolutely true. Yes, so Underground Ventures, the world's first specialized firm in geothermal technology, backed by the co-founder of a company called Unity Technologies. Some of you may know, software company based here in SF. And so we function like a VC firm, but we really have a much broader agenda. We're able to be a little bit more adventurous, and one of those ways is that we're allowed to be overexposed in geothermal and be so focused. And of course, that from a traditional venture point of view is not a good idea because you're concentrating your risk in one place. But the amazing thing about it is that people like me get to focus. My job is to do nothing other than learn everything I can about geothermal energy, technologies going into it, who is building what are the scientists doing, what's government doing, and that really, I think, is a very rare luxury for anybody in venture capital. Now, we are also a micro fund, which means we're $40 million, and while that sounds like a lot of money, the minute you're starting to drill in the ground, that money is very quickly gone. So we do very early stage technology companies that can help other bigger geothermal endeavors like Fervo and so forth de-risk and lower costs. That's really the principle. It's the picks and shovels of the industry that we're investing in with Underground Ventures.
I guess I want to ask, not for the dedicated fund, but for the more generalist funds, how did you convince your partners that this was a reasonable investment? And I did meet one of these panelists at an event about a year and a half ago, Bloomberg New Energy event, and just to give you some insight into the VC mindset, they were there and they asked me, do you know anybody who works in geothermal who I can talk to, and any startups in this room that I can talk to that are involved in geothermal? Anyway, they're on this panel today. How did you convince your team that geothermal was the place to go to after what seems to be a bit of a pivot in the world of climate investing that's going on now?
Yeah, I mean, this is an unfair conversation because Eric's known me since I was an entrepreneur as well, in a very different position on the other side of the table with investors. But back then, when I joined Obvious, I had spent the last 3 years before Obvious selling something like $6 billion worth of solar panels around the world. And I came into Obvious and I said to my partners, I think we're good on energy generation. We don't need more new forms of renewable because wind and solar, especially coupled with wind, are going to be, just fine and be very, very competitive. So that was our belief coming in because I saw and was part of the cost curve reduction there, and that was also coupled in the U.S. with basically flatlining load growth. And obviously, venture's a humbling sport, and as you go through it, you have to continually look back and say, what am I getting wrong? What am I getting wrong? And probably about 5 years ago, I started to look back and say, something's happening with load growth, and maybe it's EVs, maybe it's onshoring, and maybe it's just transitioning industry to electrification. And now we add on top of that data centers, which were just starting to emerge then, and we spend a lot of time with the big tech companies, and they tell us what they need in terms of new power generation. And baseload and 24/7 and more reliability than just firmed up power with 4-hour batteries or 6-hour batteries was starting to come into focus then. And that turned us toward baseload, clean, affordable, safe power. And when you add all those words together, you really don't end up with a great solution set. So fusion, is a $0 trillion industry, and it may remain that for some time. And you may remember that line from 20 years ago. And I think you go down the list, and fission is very exciting, and there may be a great debate here about that. But when we look at geothermal, especially when you look at closed-loop geothermal and near the surface geothermal that doesn't need fracking, doesn't need deep, that's a very, very exciting opportunity. And so it was the short answer is talking to big buyers of clean baseload renewables, and then looking at the tech, this became the only logical solution. And that allowed us to step in and say, let's take a deep dive and figure out what are the actual solutions.
Sebastian, maybe address that, but also you have a European standpoint on this. So the United States California is the biggest state in terms of geothermal. The United States is the largest country in terms of gigawatts. What's going on in Europe, and what volcanic edges can we look for?
Yeah, we obviously try to move away from the volcanic edges, but yes, in Europe, geothermal also plays a similar niche role, to be honest, with the exception for a few areas. Italy, where it originates from, 1904, first geothermal well was in Italy, but it's a long history, by the way, it's not new. But the only country you could look as an ideal is Iceland. That's the ultimate El Dorado of geothermal. But yeah, other than that, in Europe, what we are seeing now, that's the latest in the debate right now, is of course Europe is waking up, understanding that it is highly vulnerable due to very complicated supply chain situations, not just the Russia situation, but in general we are just extremely unresilient. Yeah. And the US also is showing us that, that this is the case. I think the US has a very clear resilience policy, and that's very good. We don't have that in Europe. But we're starting to wake up that we need that. And then, like Andrew just said as well, there are not that many answers what you can do. We don't have the same fracking resources in Europe. We do have actually some, but we don't want to talk about it because we think it's dirty. But so officially we don't have it. Although I think Europe will start fracking at some stage. But anyway, we don't have a lot of resources. I think there is some weird sentiment against nuclear, political sentiments, which make it very complicated. Also very costly nowadays. The latest nuclear projects in Finland or in the UK have been incredibly expensive. We're just way over-regulated in many ways. So yeah, then there's not many answers. So the answer, yeah. We will do more geothermal. I just saw Germany has a new government now, my home country, and we're getting a geothermal acceleration law now. That's interesting. Don't know how that law is going to look like yet. It's very new. But the awakening is there. Geothermal is an answer. It's a valid answer. I was in Davos at World Economic Forum in January, and I also remember that the head of the European Union there, Ms. von der Leyen, also clearly said, yes, geothermal is a resource we need to build out, and the public speech. So those are things you've never heard 5 years ago, just like this would have never happened 5 years ago. So I think we are waking up to it, that it's an important resource that we need to develop and building the frameworks for it. Actually, purely regulation-wise, there is not much currently that we need to do in order to adopt geothermal. It's actually, the regulation's pretty much there, and mostly on a local level, municipal level, where you have to do the work. There's nothing that would stop us from deploying it today.
Even with fracking or low?
Even with fracking, there's moratoriums on fracking for extracting oil and gas. Yes, we have those. But for extracting heat, there's actually no regulation, no challenges. It's like on the municipal level, on the local level, you have to convince the communities about induced seismicity and those type of topics that this is not dangerous. But other than that, there's actually no hold up for scaling it.
All right, but let me change it up a little bit and just talk about the ecosystem and what makes a healthy market for a venture capital investment. We heard from our ambitious camera person about, by the way, this is not investment advice, where could you invest today in a publicly held geothermal company? And I believe there's only one.
Ormat, yeah.
There's only, again, we're not giving investment advice.
Oh, sorry.
But there's only one public geothermal company that, although its stock has gone up recently, it hasn't been exactly buoyant over the last 25 years. These are venture capitalists, and although, yes, they want to roll up their sleeves and they want to build good companies, and they will tell you their goal is to build good companies, there has to be an exit at the end of some of their companies, or the VC circle of life does not continue. So, Ormat aside, what are the potential exits for? And again, I know we're very early on this, and you have to build these companies, they have to execute, and they have to install gigawatts of power, but somewhere in a meeting, you're talking about who are the potential, and there's an obvious set of answers, but is there an unobvious set of answers?
It's his question, obviously.
Obviously, it's unobvious. I can't answer.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, are you saying what are the exits, like who's going to buy these companies?
Yeah, aside from the oil and gas majors.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the beauty of this. Like, if you're in robotic farming, just as an example, like, you know, Caterpillar and John Deere and, you know, there's certain, and a bunch of big heavy equipment companies, but that's sort of it, and they're low margin businesses. That's a tough acquisition set as a comparison. But in this one, you have oil majors, but you have sort of everything majors in the energy space. There are a lot of buyers, and they have, right now, a lot of cash, and they are sort of desperate for transitions. We also, I mean, even big tech companies could buy these companies. You know, there's a lot of different players who would be very excited, or there's a vibrant market in private equity of people who like to buy energy assets. But my hope is that we are backing not the companies that get acquired by the old companies, but the companies that become the new companies and become the energy platform for, you know, globally in each of their regions, and maybe become the new energy majors for sure. I mean, that's a potential as well.
Okay. Torsten, I'm sorry, we'll get to you.
Yeah.
But this is obviously something you have to sorry, I won't be using
I think the unobvious side agrees with the obvious answer on that one. But I will say, I think I was a founder here in San Francisco for 10 years, and as a founder, I think I learned that you shouldn't try to build your company for a particular exit scenario. You should build a lasting company that adds value to the market and to the world. And I very much, from a venture capital point of view, also believe in that. That means that we are not as picky about our portfolio companies showing a very clear, credible path to that exit, because this market is in its infancy. We're going to see so much happening over the next 5-10 years that you're not going to be able to guess that path anyway. So I think the comment about the oil and gas majors turning into energy majors, I'm absolutely in agreement with. And I know there are some people saying, oh, we don't want to work with oil and gas, or we can't work with oil and gas, and I understand that. But you know, I think we need to remember the enormity of the exercise that oil and gas is globally today. You know, for us to get to, I think the IEA is projecting, 8 to 10% of electricity being geothermal in 2050.
15 by now. Even.
15 of the growth, but of the total supply at the time, let's say 8%. But even that, we're talking about $1 trillion market if that happens. We're talking about possibly 100,000, maybe up to 1 million wells being drilled. And that sounds like a lot, but oil and gas today drills 85,000 wells a year. Like,
in a bad year, to be honest.
It's not insane to have that ambition. And so I think absolutely there's a case for them to turn into real energy companies, and there are opportunities to go public, there are opportunities to do trade sales and so forth. So I'm really not worried, honestly.
Okay. You're seeing a lot of, for every 5 or 6 startups that are in the lobby here, there's 100 that you've looked at that you've decided to pass on. Another VC, Gabriel Kra at Prelude Ventures, says there's 8 T's for startup investing, team, and some other T's like timing and technology. What type of teams are you seeing? Let's go with you, Sebastian. Are you seeing oil and gas folk? I'm sure you're seeing everything, but what's predominant? Is it solar people saying, I've had enough of that? Or is it, there are a few in the audience, is it oil and gas people who are seeing this new light, or is it completely out of these industries that are just seeing?
It's predominantly oil and gas people, to be honest. I think also the epicenter of the geothermal movement is also Houston, where majority of the companies sit, so that's not a coincidence. So I would say like Houston again will be the energy capital now of a different energy. So yes, the majority is coming from oil and gas. Of course, now you see young entrepreneurs coming into the market who more business-focused people are coming out of business schools. Well, thinking, okay, there's potentially an opportunity here we should grasp. But if I look at the more or less established geothermal companies today, it's actually pretty much all oil and gas people. Yeah.
Really? Yes.
Yeah, I would add to that that there are thankfully also people coming out of other disciplines, that see this as an opportunity, and I think oil and gas is a great place to start because all of that experience is really useful. But we're going to need material scientists, mechanical engineers, economists, computer scientists, all walks of life, and we are starting to see that come out of the woodworks, which is really nice. I think it's absolutely very technical founders we still see in this space. I'm seeing, some of the worst pitch decks I have ever seen, and that's okay. We're in the early days here. I think that is our job, is to see through that this is not polished yet, and that's fine. But that will come over time as we get more disciplines into the field.
Yeah, I think I think the observations are more about the stage that we're at in the industry ramp, not about the exact type of people it will take, because entrepreneurs come from all walks of life. I mean, I've been to conferences like this 25 years ago in the solar industry, just like this, and as you said, it was very exciting because you could feel that these were the people who 25 years later you all are going to be part of a massive movement, and that's extraordinary. I then did the same thing in the battery space probably, 10 years later, and we had a lot of the same vibe where it was very, very technical, a lot of academics, a lot of what TLR are you and all this, TRL are you, and then, one of my favorite entrepreneurs, Matteo Jaramillo of Form Energy, we're not investors, but a great founder. He has in the battery space, in a very technical, complex, long-duration battery space, has a degree from Yale Divinity School, which maybe applies because you need some religion to believe that you're going to get through that very, very challenging environment. But that just shows you that it takes all types, and he knew to partner with the right kind of technical folks, et cetera. So I think there will be, maybe Houston's a hub, maybe a lot of people are looking to come over from oil and gas, which we certainly see. I also see a lot of entrepreneurs coming over from tech, as Thorsten's done and others, and that's really exciting too, just from internet technology or from artificial intelligence. And Zanskar was Stanford and Utah, and there are a lot of geology folks and others who come from industry, but there are also people just coming from software as well.
On that note, maybe I wish, and first of all, I hope we're going to see more people move in. As capital flows in, as people like we start investing into this, people will get excited about it, and people from other disciplines will come in. I think that really starts also with capital that's actually available to attract entrepreneurs. But one thing I hope for, and that's, I'm not a European, but I hope for the US that you're able to build a sector out of it here too. Because we failed with wind and solar and batteries. That's in China, the sector today, right? But I think specifically the US, with all the firms that you have here, with all the knowledge and expertise that you have a real chance to build a global sector, be a global dominance in geothermal.
And the resource too.
Yeah, you have it.
Present.
And the workforce, right? You don't.
Yeah, everything. Skills, asset, know-how, you all have it. Literally, don't.
Nuclear has a lot of stuff going for it, as an example, but its workforce is rapidly dying off.
Don't follow my country. That's what I'm trying to say, to be honest. We scaled wind and solar quite significantly through some favorable legislation and a lot of subsidies in the early 2000s. I was an investor in that phase myself, and I paid my tuition fee in that phase. That's how you not do it, because in the end of the day, the subsidies stopped and all the companies died and moved to China.
Yep, we lived through this for sure.
Yeah. Exactly. In the US was quite similar. I mean, I was in Cylinder Investor, so I've been there.
All right. There used to be an organization called the Department of Energy, and they had also within them they had the Loan Programs Office, and between those two, anyway, the DOE put out something called a Commercial Liftoff Report. Yes. Which are super valuable reports that cover a number of sectors. One of them is advanced geothermal, and these are sober, smart, pragmatic reports. We've downloaded them and put them in an archive in case they get memory hold. But they say that their goal is $60 to $70 per megawatt hour by 2030 and $45 per megawatt hour by 2035, and that achieving commercial liftoff will require 2 to 5 gigawatts across 4 to 6 states and $20 to $25 billion by 2030. Smita said that she introduced you as the folks who were going to finance geothermal, but they're not. They're going to finance the startups that make geothermal, and that $25 billion probably not going to come from this panel. Tell me a little bit about. I mentioned some figures of merit, some dollars. What are you looking for? When somebody pitches you and says some number, do you discount it, or do you have a number in mind that you're trying to think of? What metric? Am I looking at the wrong metrics? It's always been dollar per watt, LCOE. It costs $65 to sell a barrel of crude. What does a barrel of hot water sell for, I guess? So what are the metrics? What are the finances? I know we're early stage, but you're getting pitch decks with numbers on them. What are those numbers talking about? What are the?
I'd love to hear from the.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a stab at this. Yeah. So I hear you on the DOE. The latest grant opportunity they put out for high temperature geothermal tools. They actually asked for $35 per megawatt plan. If what you're pitching to them is going to make a difference to this market, they don't want to hear from you if you're not at 35 megawatts, dollars per megawatt hour. And I think that's really the core both opportunity and problem here. That you can come up with any LCOE number you want based on any kind of combination of parameters, and we are just very early. So. On the off-taker side, it's not all about money. If you're a data center, it's not about the cost of your energy. It's about downtime. You cannot have downtime. It has to be reliable, and you're okay paying more for that if you can get clean, firm energy for that. So it really is. I try to not be too focused on a particular number in those projections, partly because we don't know, and partly because the market is looking at very different things. We try to see it from a little bit of a different angle, which is a sort of a universal tech stack within this space. How do we allow developers to pull from interoperable different types of technologies, and as long as startups can come to me and demonstrate that there is commercial interest or traction, depending on how far they are, into the existing market, that's a good enough starting point for me. So, but I'm early stage also, so I have that luxury, to be fair.
I think one point to make is about cost of capital. That's a big topic for the more advanced companies in the space who are building projects today. The cost of capital today for Fervo is in the high teens, so it's quite expensive. And the liftoff targets, I think, talk about 7% cost of capital, so we're quite far away from that, and that makes a big difference. So a Fervo.
Wait, so the Fervo's at high teens.
Yes.
What was the second number you gave?
That's the DOE liftoff target.
Okay.
When they talk about 65 per megawatt hour, that's with a 7% cost of
money. Okay.
And but if you do the math, more or less. It's not exact math, but if Fevo would be able to access 7% cost of capital today, they would today be at 65, even below that. Cost of capital makes a big difference. So we had a geothermal roundtable financing the geothermal transition at New York Climate Week this year, or last year in September. That was really, and we brought together big infrastructure guys and the banks and so on that talked about that, because it is a lot about financing this. And the DOE was still intact back then. They were there, and
They're still intact.
Yeah. Well, I'm quoting you. So they were also on the table. Yeah, and that was a question: how do we bring? What are the tools that we have? And in Europe, for example, we employ some tools. We employ so-called contract for difference. You have feed-in tariffs for geothermal. I think these are things that can work quite well, give investors the confidence to lend at a lower rate. And that is really crucial, because that's the difference between 100 today and 65, where we should or could be technologically.
So that's just the risk between an oil and gas business and a geothermal business being factored into the.
And when you talk to Brookfield,
the new technology, right? I mean, I think some people are pursuing geothermal opportunities that don't involve a lot of new technology. They might, like Zanskar, involve a new way to find things, but after that, you're just doing ORMAT-like off-the-shelf stuff, and that will ultimately result in a lower cost of capital once the resources are found. So there may be different angles to get at how to get to that lower cost of capital.
Yeah, exactly. But like an EGS approach like Fevo is doing is more novel. And we had the Brookfields and KKRs at the table too, and they basically, their point of view is, okay, I would need to see 20-year performance data to really get to that 7%. That's a long road.
Can I just add one thing? Like, I would also suggest to founders, I think it's underappreciated, this sort of spectrum of what investors are looking for in terms of scale, because there may be some people willing to invest in, I saw a very interesting topside solution for geothermal that was just a different Rankine cycle engine that was probably a lot more efficient.
Yes.
It wasn't clear that to me was going to become a multi-billion-dollar company. And for obvious, we are really looking for what can become absolutely massive. But rather than sort of mush your pitch into something that must be a multi-billion-dollar outcome, there are investors who would still look at that and say, look, that's a critical piece of the whole system. It could be very valuable and be hundreds of millions of dollars of outcome, just not billions, and they'll invest in that. So I think it's really helpful to ask investors, hey, what scale of return are you looking for? And it's okay if you're not projecting one that turns into the next ExxonMobil.
Okay. We've talked, there's been a lot of conversations. By the way, this is a manel, and I apologize, we didn't set it up. Previously there was an all-woman panel, so this kind of makes up for it. This is a big picture question. In the before days of the neoliberal philosophy, we thought we could build our way out of this, and we would all get rich on incentives and build wind, solar, and storage. And I have to say, this is my cult and my tribe and my religion, and I'm going to have to be converting soon, I'm pretty sure. Are we in clean tech 3.0? You lived through 1.0, 2.0, and these are different days. And yet there's still an enormous populace who want to build clean energy, but we have to do it in a slightly different way, in a different philosophy. What is Clean Tech 3.0? I've announced it. It's happened here. You were here, remember? What does Clean Tech 3.0 look like? Because I don't think it looks like 2018, 2021.
Climate Week.
Sorry, I know this is a geothermal.
Yeah, that's a very.
I don't want to hijack it, but
Wow. This whole week, I've been in these rooms with amazing founders and people who care 100% deeply about climate and this transition, and it feels like being in an episode of the television show Severance, if anyone's watched this, where you're in the room and everything is one way, and then you walk out the door and you're in this dystopian, horrifying other world that's the opposite. So my answer is I don't think we're out of 2.0 yet, and unfortunately there will be some, let's call it creative but painful destruction before we come out into 3.0, and I would suspect your publication and others will have headlines saying maybe this whole thing was just another version of what happened 15 years ago, and is it a bust, et cetera, and certainly mainstream media will say it is and was. And that will be wrong. There have been plenty of great examples of very large successes and many multi-billion-dollar outcomes already in this wave versus the first one where there were maybe 3 or 4 and not that many venture versions of those 3 or 4. And so this will be a different, when the history is written, this will be a different phase, but it will be cyclical like a lot of things, like blockchain, like, tech bio, and other cycles of venture where things come and go. And then we will probably move on to a 3.0, which is probably more resilient and persistent and moves up and down, but at a higher level, so you don't hit the bottom quite as much.
All right. I know I telescoped it out. If you want to talk about propants and plug and perf, go right ahead. But if you give me a broader kind of feel for where we're at in climate world.
I mean, we on a global level, we're seeing a change. And to be honest, China is playing a big part in that change. China has understood many years ago that they're quite vulnerable, and that's where they took a strategic decision for the country to become also energy independent, right? And they're on the way to that. China is not electrifying for being green. That's not the point. So if you want to call it Clean Tech 3.0 or whatever, I think we're seeing a huge shift towards resilience, but the beauty is that resilience, you cannot be resilient without being sustainable. That's literally not possible. So I actually am quite positive, and when I speak to our LPs, they share that mindset, is maybe this is the acceleration that we needed. Maybe the climate topic was always quite distant, quite far away, and a future generation's problem. But resilience is an immediate threat, and it's a life threat, yeah? And that actually works as a real strong accelerator. So I'm positive in that way that we finally have found that fire to bring out more resilient solutions. This is not just for energy; it's also for all types of other industries as well. But that's where I'm currently seeing it. That there is actually an acceleration happening that we hadn't had before.
This is such a good point, and while the diversity isn't perfect on this panel, the geographic diversity is, and I think I answered the question from a very American perspective, and the reality is that the only question I think with climate 3.0 or whatever is whether America is involved or not, because the rest of the world is all over it, and Europe doesn't have a choice but to make a transition because of the resiliency standpoint. China doesn't have a choice to make this transition or not, and America does have a choice. So we have to decide, are we going to be part of it or be left behind while others take the lead?
Just very news-driven today. I mean, you probably saw the announcement from the EPA, chief yesterday, that he's going to put a dagger in the heart of the climate community. And then the opposite movement today with President Xi announcing that he will make big announcements before the COP in Belém about showing how all industrial sectors out of China will become carbon neutral. And addressing climate topic. That's so weird. The US saying, we're putting a dagger in the heart, and China picks it up, the dagger almost, and says, like, we're going to show the world how it's done. And now China all of a sudden is leading the green transition, which is totally bizarre, let's be honest.
Electro state, please.
Just to build on that, I like Andrew's point about the geographical diversity, because there's a lot of noise, We get carried away with all sorts of stuff. Every day there's something crazy going on. But if you look at that more longer-term macro trend of, let's just say, electricity, we expect roughly a doubling of global electricity over the next 25 years. Now, a lot of people think that that's mostly data centers. Sure, it's driving a lot of it right now, but really the reason for that doubling globally is that the rest of the world is raising their living standards, and they're electrifying essentially their daily lives. And that means most of that new electricity generation needs to be built outside of the US and Europe. So we are absolutely taking the view that this is not dependent on subsidies, on any kind of incentives. We need to get this field to a point where it's competitive economically anywhere on the planet relatively soon in order to take part in this journey. I believe that it can be, because it's not complicated. We're just pouring water down to a well, and it nicely heats up. It's not nuclear fission or fusion or anything that requires complicated supply chains. So I really believe that we will get there, but I think it's important to remember that long-term trend as well.